James Bond 007 Bloodstone starts off with a bang. It's a fantastic prologue that quickly moves from shooting a few guys on a yacht right into a pair of chase scenes by boat and by car. In fact, it might be a little too memorable, because the next few levels pale in comparison. And that's one of the biggest flaws with Bloodstone. Once the opening credits have rolled, the game gets off to a really slow start. This is an action game that's at its best when the adrenaline levels are high and you're playing a one-man wrecking ball. But fortunately, Bloodstone does find its groove about halfway through, and the rest of the game is an absolute blast. This makes Bloodstone a fairly uneven experience, but it is a worthwhile one, especially for James Bond fans.
Got that right.
The story in Bloodstone is paint-by-numbers James Bond, the usual mix of international intrigue and tangled conspiracies. It's a story that works not because of any emotional attachments to what's happening, but because of the sheer variety of situations you'll find yourself in. At any moment, you might be gazing out at fireworks above Monaco, chasing a guy down across the rain-slick rooftops of Bangkok, or racing your car across a frozen river in Siberia, etc., etc., etc. The variety is delightfully absurd and really works in the game's favor.
Did you know there were going to be fireworks?
Honestly, yes.
There's a lot of variety to the gameplay as well. Bloodstone is simultaneously a third-person shooter with a heavy reliance on cover, a stealth game that values melee takedowns over firefights, a racing game with explosive tracks, and a gadget-driven espionage simulator. The gadget stuff is the only real weak link, but it's kind of a throwaway anyways. Scanning and hacking objects with your cell phone is tedious, but it's also dead simple, and you never really get annoyed with it. It's just sort of filler.
But not an unpleasant surprise.
That said, most of your time is spent in on-foot combat situations. As a third-person shooter, Bloodstone is perfectly solid. The cover works well, the guns have a nice kick to them. It's a perfectly adequate, if slightly unspectacular third-person shooter. Fortunately, Bloodstone is also a game with really slick melee combat, and it encourages you to use it frequently as a complement to just shooting everyone. There's a mechanic in there that works really similarly to Splinter Cell, Conviction's Mark and Execute. What you do is you pull off a melee takedown on a guy and you earn a focus kill, which is basically an instant headshot with your gun. What this does is allow you to really quickly chain headshots together to just tear your way through fight scenes, and that sense of momentum feels great. The game is definitely at its best when you're running up to dudes, judo chopping them in the throat, and then firing off a few headshots and just sort of looping it all together in one vicious cycle. Now, most of the later levels give you a really good sense of urgency to maintain a brisk pace in combat, like the chase scene where you're dashing across rooftops and taking care of anyone in your way. But there are a few early levels that seem to forget what makes the game so much fun, like a trek through the catacombs of Istanbul where you're running through way too many empty corridors, or a later level where you have to infiltrate a Siberian office building and slowly walk around hacking things with your cell phone and really only killing one or two guys at a time. It's too much of a slow start, which is a shame because the game really picks up in the second half.
Can you handle it?
Yes. Don't leave me here.
So while combat is a little uneven across the entire game, Bloodstone's driving sections are consistently thrilling. These are some of the best parts in the game, those moments where your target takes off and you have to chase him down in a car. The cars handle really well, and the tracks are usually filled with all kinds of explosions and crumbling roads, making the racing parts feel ripped right out of a blockbuster movie. And that's probably not much of a surprise, considering that the developer, Bizarre Creations, is really well known for racing games like the Project Gotham series. If there's one flaw to the driving scenes, well, it's that there's just not enough of them, because they're so much fun.
This isn't all fun and games.
Finally, there's also a multiplayer component to Bloodstone, which does add a little bit of value to the overall package, considering the story is only about 5 or 6 hours long. But to be honest, it's nothing special and probably won't keep your attention for too long. And that's a shame because Bloodstone could be a pretty special game if it offered a more consistent experience across the board. But as is, Bloodstone is still a quality action game and an entertaining James Bond experience as well.
How did you know?
Quite honestly, intuition.